folks, and welcome back to Fishing with Den. So last week I went out and I showed you the basics of fishing with bread punch, and of course using liquidized bread, or sometimes known as punch crumb, for ground bait. Now obviously liquidized bread, as the name says, is a loaf of bread which you liquidize up in a mixer and you use that as feed. Punch crumb is the stuff that you buy in the tackle shops, and again it's pretty much breadcrumbs, but it's dry and you have to mix it a bit like ground bait. The problem with it is that last time I looked it was something like £3.50 to £4 for a 700 gram bag, which is, I don't know, $7 or $8 Australian or American, which makes it a pretty damn expensive way of doing things. So today I'm going to show you my way of doing it with just the same breadcrumbs as I used for making the bread paste a few videos ago. Now this stuff, it's 500 grams and it costs about 50 pence or about $1 in either Australia or the US, and for me it works just as well. Now obviously we're not fishing the top flight of match fishing now, and obviously if you are, then you might want to go to punch crumb because you may feel it has benefits. But for the average angler, this works really well. I did show it you last week, but it's a nice fine mixture of breadcrumbs, and this is some I made up earlier on. If I just squeeze it a second, just like ground bait, holds together, and just like ground bait, when you do that, it all breaks up in your hand. If it doesn't do that, and it becomes all stodgy, then you've made a paste, and that isn't going to break up on the bottom. So, there is a way of mixing this stuff. It's not so much tricky, you just have to know how to do it. But first of all, I think I'll show you how not to do it. Now you may have to do this on the riverbank. Personally, I prefer not to. I tend to make mine up the night before. But if you do have to make it up on the riverbank, let's just use this small bowl to show you how not to do it. Put some breadcrumbs in, as usual. Might as well use up the rest of this pack. Get some water and pour it in. It's a bit like ground bait, but you have to be very careful about how much you put in. If I put a bit too much in, like that, and then start to agitate, it does bulk out very well. Right, so as you can see, we've immediately gone overboard. We've got a problem, because what we've got now is what I made some weeks ago on another video, which is bread paste. And there it is, hard, solid bread paste. And you can't return from that, throw it away, it's had it. There's no point in even trying to use this mix unless you want to use it as bread paste. If I put it into a container, normally, as you'll be aware, bread paste doesn't break up, but ground bait, if this was supposed to be ground bait, does break up. Put that in, and nothing, absolutely nothing. That should now be breaking up on the bottom, and it should be being a really good attractant for fish. But at the moment, it's just a stodgy, horrible mess. Well, for the purposes of doing liquidized bread or punch crumb, anyway. If you're putting that on the hook, that's exactly what you want. Just to sit like that, nice soft paste. There's a little bit breaking off here and there, but this is just no use to us whatsoever. So now let's show you the proper way to do it. So normally if I'm making up a batch, I'll make it up in this bowl here, but for the purposes of this demonstration, as you saw a minute ago, I'm just going to use this. Just makes it easier for you to see what's going on. Pour some breadcrumbs into the bowl. Normally I'd use the full pack, by the way, for my purposes. And also I've got one of these spray bottles. This is quite a posh one which you can pump to make it work. And I like to use this to literally just get small amounts of spray on. You may or may not have one of those, so I'm just going to use a small amount of water as if it came from the pond or river. Put a small amount in and then agitate quickly. What you don't want is to allow the water to literally form blobs or bits of paste. So small amounts, and then quickly agitate so you can get the consistency correct. As you saw before, if you put lots of water in, you just end up with paste. A little bit more, and keep doing that until you feel you've almost got to the consistency of ground bait. Light and fluffy ground bait for the moment, but let's actually just agitate this a bit more. See what we think. Yeah, that's not too bad. It's not quite right yet, but just like ground bait, if I squeeze it, it holds together and it will break down, as I showed you a minute ago, just like ground bait. You might think that's it, and you could get away with that for carp venues, definitely, but there are lumps in it. And not only that, just like ground bait, this thing is going to start to dry up. So leave it for a few minutes. I'm going to leave it for 10 minutes while I go and grab a cup of tea, and when I come back, this will have dried out and we need to repeat the process. If you don't do that, by the time you get to the bank, this will just be a dry powder which won't stick together, and all it's going to do is form a cloud as it goes down. And if you're in 6 feet of water, or 5 feet, 7 feet, whatever it is, you're going to have an issue. Maybe 2 or 3 feet, not so much, but really you've got to let this dry out a little bit. So I'm off for a cup of tea. It's actually about 5 or 6 minutes later now, and I've just come back in, just giving this a quick feel. And if I now squeeze this ground bait or punch crumb, as you can see, it just breaks up too easily. What's happened is that the breadcrumbs have soaked up the water, and so trying to form a decent ball of ground bait now is almost impossible. It just breaks up in your hand, look. So what we have to do now is just repeat the process. A little bit of water and agitate quickly until we get the same consistency as we had a few minutes ago. Now it's not going to take much water this time, so just be careful. Don't want to end up with paste again, do we? And in fact, for this small amount of ground bait, that's all I required. If I now go back to what I was saying, squeeze, and it's actually breaking up nicely in my hand. So, you may need to wait another few minutes. You'll learn by trial and error what works for you. This actually is going to be fine. What you now need to do is to riddle it. And the reason you riddle it is to get rid of lumps of paste. Now, in the summer months, if you're carp fishing, a few lumps probably isn't going to hurt because carp are greedy, they've got good appetites, and it's also a good attractant. In the winter, however, for carp, and particularly for roach and bream skimmers, you really don't want any lumps at all because that can fill them up. So what we do is we riddle it. Now if you've got a shop bought riddle, that's fine. I sometimes use this. It's a garden riddle. It's got about 6mm mesh, and this is 4mm plastic mesh, which happens to go with the barbecue, would you believe? So depending on what size of lumps I want to allow through, I'll either just go with the 6mm or indeed the 4mm. Having said that, this is more like what people call pinky mesh. Now this mesh actually started its life as a waste paper basket. And I happen to have this tub, didn't have a round one, I got a square one, but that's okay. And I'm going to use this one today. So if I get my bowl again, just to put this into, I'll put the punch crumb in here. And if I now just shake it through, normally I'll actually do this in here like that, but so you can see. Okay, so if you look now, you can see there's an awful lot of large lumps, and those are basically paste. Now, what you can do is just push them through the riddle, and you can get most of them through, and then if you've got a few lumps left, you can throw them away. That leaves you with a nice punch crumb. If, like me, however, you just want to go a stage further, if I put these into this tub here, I then put mine into the blender. Remember, I do mine at home all the time, so it's much easier, I find, if you do that. Put this in. Just blend it for literally probably 30 seconds or so. Just a word of advice, if you've got a lot of punch crumb in here, then it does tend to sort of stay at the bottom. It doesn't properly mix, so I tend to shake it a little bit. Just literally, that's all you need. Okay, so now I just get rid of all the worst of the crumbs that are on there. And then go through the same process. I'll actually do it in the bowl this time. Now you can see all of those large lumps have gone, and we've put them into the actual the mix of the punch crumb. What we've got are these little tiny lumps, which again, because they're so small, I'd be quite happy if I was carp fishing to put those into the mix and allow them to be picked up by the carp. As I said though, if you're doing this with skimmers and roach or even carp in the winter, especially in the winter, you'd also get rid of these and just end up with that fine punch crumb or liquidized bread mix that we see here. So now I suppose you want to see how this stuff works. So if you were to put this into a pot, a pole pot, and just feed it without squeezing, that's what happens. And of course, you've just got this cascade of particles all up and down the water column, so you're going to have fish at all sorts of levels where you don't want them to be. You'd prefer them to be on the bottom. I'll just let that settle for a minute, because it will settle over time, but it's going to take a few seconds or so. So bear with me, and I'll be back in just a tick, and we'll squeeze a ball and show you how it should work. So here we go then. If I take a ball of the mixture and squeeze it, now a lot depends on how much you squeeze this stuff, and it's the same with ground bait actually. A heavier squeeze and put it in. As you see, it's gone right to the bottom and it's already started to break up. See it all breaking up nicely there? And there are very few particles in the water column. So if you give this stuff a light squeeze, that's probably fine for 2 or 3 feet of water. Slightly stronger squeeze for deeper water, and so on and so forth. Try this yourselves. I'm sure you've got something you can do in the kitchen. And that way you'll know exactly what to expect. There's very little crumb in the water column here. And if you were to actually mix this up the night before and leave it in the fridge overnight, there'd be even less. And that's all there is to it, folks. It's actually pretty simple, isn't it? The trick is small amounts of water, but lots of quick agitation with your hand. It's a little bit of something you probably have to do a couple of 3 times to get right, but really just don't put too much water in or you'll end up with paste. So that's it for another one. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know the score. Click the button. If you want to subscribe, you can. Until the next time, bye for now.